few important definitions in this chapter. As you can see, please take a screenshot of the same so that you can refer this later on. I will understand and make you understand the interconnectivity of this chapter as we go along. Some chapters like these are not ideally suited for your textbook, though there is only one page from the textbook that we will refer for this chapter, which explains the process of the takeover. But apart from that, this chapter has quite a few lengthy definitions. Let's go into each one of them one by one. Since the name of the chapter is Takeover and Substantial Acquisition of Shares, typically acquirers are engaged in either directly or indirectly. They are interested in buying the shares of the company, taking over the control of the company, or buying the voting rights of the company. That's what typically happens in any sort of a takeover scenario. So the acquisition of the shares can be both direct and indirect. Direct meaning they can directly talk to the target company, enter into an agreement and buy the shares directly from them. Or they can indirectly go to the stock exchange and then buy the shares indirectly from the stock market. Both options are always available for every acquirer. Acquirer is the person acquiring the shares, voting rights, or control of the company. Any person who helps this acquirer is called as PAC, or person acting in concert. We will see who's PAC later on, but whenever an acquirer buys equity shares, voting rights, or tries to get control over another company, the person trying to do this is called as the acquirer, and the person and the company in which such a transaction is taking place is called as the target company. If an acquirer tries to take over the control of the target company, he basically wants to either get the right to appoint the majority of the directors, he wants the right to control the management of the company, or he wants to control the policy decisions of the company. If an acquirer does any one of these three, that is what is considered to be taking over the control of the target company. So if an acquirer directly or indirectly acquires control, directly or indirectly acquires voting rights, or directly or indirectly acquires shares in the target company with or without the help of a PAC, that process is called as acquisition. The person doing that is called as the acquirer. Acquirer does acquisition, and acquisition is the process of directly or indirectly acquiring shares, voting rights, or control in another target company. And control means control or appoint the majority of the board of directors, control the management, or control the policy. This person acting in concert are of multiple varieties. First is any person who has the same objective as the acquirer. So let's say Elon Musk took the help of few of his friends to acquire Twitter. So his friends are not his relatives technically, but they still had the common objective of helping Elon take over Twitter. So any person who helped Elon in this process is called as a PAC. But certain people are deemed to be PACs as per the definition which appears in India. The holding and subsidiary company of the person who's trying to acquire the target company, that is considered to be the PAC. So you have the acquirer who's trying to acquire the target company, the holding company, and the subsidiary company of this acquirer is deemed to be the PAC, which will help the acquirer in acquiring this company. Any other company which has the same management or falls under the same control is also deemed to be the PAC of the acquirer. The directors of the acquirer, the promoters of the acquirer, and if the acquirer is an individual, the immediate relatives of the acquirer along with the immediate relatives of the directors and promoters. All such people put together are deemed to be PAC of the acquirer. So the difference between normal PAC and deemed PAC is any normal person who helps the acquirer in accomplishing his objective of acquiring the other company is called as PAC. But some people are deemed to be the PAC of the acquirer, the holding and subsidiary company of the acquirer, any other company having same management, directors of the acquirer company, promoters of the acquirer company, the immediate relatives of the directors and promoters, any venture capital fund, any mutual fund, or any alternate investment fund, which the acquirer has invested, and the sponsor, trustee, or AMC of these entities are also considered to be deemed PAC. Sponsors are people who start the mutual fund AIF or VCF. Trustees are the people who manage the funds of the mutual fund AIF or VCF. And AMC, which is called as Asset Management Company, is the entity that will decide where they will invest the money of the mutual fund AIF and VCF. So any fund in India typically has a creator, a manager, and a person taking care of the investments. Person taking care of the investments is called AMC. Person taking care of the day-to-day management is the trustee. Person who created that particular fund is called as the sponsor. Trustee can also be an individual or a company, and all these people put together are also deemed to be the PAC of the acquirer. Apart from these funds, there are also one other fund, which is the Collective Investment Scheme, CIS, which also has a trustee and a CIMC. For mutual funds, AIF and VCF, you have AMCs. For collective investment schemes, it is CIMC, Collective Investment Management Company. So they will also take care of the investments, and trustee will take care of the management of the CIS. Any other merchant banker or portfolio manager of the acquirer is also deemed to be the PAC. Any other capital market intermediary like stockbrokers, banks, underwriters, all these people, they can also be considered to be deemed PAC of this acquirer. And if the acquirer is an individual, the relatives of these intermediaries are also deemed to be PAC. And if the acquirer is a company, then the holding and subsidiary company of the intermediary will also be deemed to be the PAC of the acquirer. If the acquirer has invested in any investment company or fund, the shareholders of such investment company or investment fund, whoever owns more than 10% paid up capital of this fund, will also be deemed to be the PAC of the acquirer. There is absolutely no way you will remember this definition in the exam, so my suggestions might as well not really study it. But if you can, go through it step by step rather than studying it as a paragraph. Look at it from the perspective of the acquirer, and the people related to the acquirer are deemed to be the PAC. And PAC means person acting in concert. And why PACs are important is they have some obligations that SEBI has imposed on them later on. That is why they are important. So acquirer and PAC together will be doing the process of acquisition. Sometimes people can do the acquisition alone, and sometimes they can do the acquisition with the help of other people. Usually it is with the help of other people, and such people are called as person acting in concert. Once they have made the move for acquiring this particular target company, they will first determine what is called as the enterprise value of the target company. Enterprise value refers to the total market capitalization, which is nothing but market price multiplied by total shares. This amount will be called as the market capitalization, plus the total debts that the company has raised, total preference shares, total minority interest of equity shares, minus cash and cash equivalents. This will give you value, what is called as enterprise value. In other words, this is also the alternate definition for a more modern approach to net worth. This is the value of a particular company, typically under SEBI regulations. So that value is the enterprise value. And based on this enterprise value itself, the acquirer will make an attempt to buy the shares of this target company. This target company may have frequently traded shares. If the total number of shares of this company which is traded in the stock exchange is more than 10% of its total shares, so if the company has 10,000 shares and more than 10% of this 10,000 shares, which is 1,000 shares, is traded regularly on the stock exchange, such a company will be called as a company with frequently traded shares. We have seen this definition of immediate relatives appear in multiple places. So who are your immediate relatives? This applies only to individuals. So your parents, spouse, siblings, children and stepchildren will be considered as the immediate relatives of both the acquirer and the PAC. Once you have decided that you are now ready to buy the shares of this company, you will then have to start making some announcements. So for that, this identified date is very important. Identified date is 10 days before starting of the tendering period. Remember, you are the acquirer who's trying to buy the shares. So once people start selling the shares to you, they will only start selling the shares to you in the tendering period. 10 days before that tendering period is the identified date. And offer period includes tendering period. So offer period and your tendering period together will be the large chunk of time in which the total acquisition happens. So the offer period is the date of entering into the agreement with the target company if you are doing direct acquisition. If you are doing indirect acquisition, it is the date of making the public announcement. And if it is not applicable in both these cases, then it is the date of paying the consideration. Suppose you never entered into an agreement with anybody, but still they sold their shares to you. In that case, it will be the date of you paying the consideration for buying those shares. And in any other case, it will be the date of withdrawal of the offer. One of these 4 days is when the offer period begins. After the offer period begins, the identified date arrives, and then only tendering period will begin. So this is the important set of definitions for this particular takeover code chapter, which is called as substantial acquisition of shares and takeover regulations. In this regulation, you will make 4 types of open offers. First is a mandatory open offer, where you should have a shareholding of either less than 25 or more than 25%. We already know that the minimum public shareholding that any listed company should have is 25%, which means if a company has 100 shares, 25% of those shares will be owned by the public. That is what is called minimum public shareholding. That means the acquirer can only own maximum 75% shares. So some acquirers may have, let's say I'm an acquirer who has 10% shares. I buy another 8% shares, my shareholding becomes 18%. Do I have to make a mandatory open offer? The answer is no. Let's say I have 17% shares in the company. I buy 10% and then I sell 4% on the same date. So my net shareholding is 23%. Do I have to make a mandatory open offer? The answer is yes, because you crossed 25% first and then you dropped back below 25%. If you cross 25%, you should make mandatory open offer number 1. Once you hit 25%, and you have to make a public announcement for buying a minimum of at least another additional 26% shares. So once you hit 27, you have to make an offer for buying another 26, which can potentially increase your shareholding beyond 50%, which will make the target company your subsidiary company. And that is what is called as takeover. So that is the aim. You have to at least buy 26. You can buy more, but the minimum public announcement is 26. You make this offer for 26, but people may not sell all the shares to you back. So you might only end up getting, let's say, 15% out of this 26. So you had 17, you had 10, let's ignore the 4 for now. That made it 27. You made a public announcement for 26, but you only got 15. So your current shareholding is 42%. Now you fall under category 2. If your shareholding is 25 to 75%, you can only buy 5% shares per annum. Whichever share carries voting rights, those shares you can buy only 5% per annum. And this 5% also cannot be net, it has to be gross. So let's say you have 42% shares now. You bought 3% in October. You bought 1% in November. You sold 4% in December. And you bought another 3% in January. So what is the net effect? 3 plus 1 plus 3 is 7. 7 minus 4 is 3%. So did you buy 5% shares? You might think the answer is no. But actually you bought 5% shares because you will exclude the net. You will exclude the sales. Your total purchases should not exceed 5%. That is how you will read this provision. So 5%, how you exceeded, you bought 3, you bought 1 and you bought 3 in January. So in January, once you cross that 5% threshold, in November you were at 4. In January you crossed the 5%. So now you will make another 26% public announcement called as a mandatory open offer. This is how the mandatory open offer works. Another option that is available for people who already have 25 to 75% shares. So right now, let's say I was at 42. And I ended up buying 7, but again I sold 4. So I reached 45, but I still have to make a public announcement for 26% minimum. This 26% will take me over the 75% limit. So the maximum shares I can buy, even if I make a public announcement for 26, cannot exceed 75%. You have to make this mandatory open offer. What if you don't want to play these games? What if you don't want to make any of these mandatory open offers? Can you escape any of these provisions? You can. Suppose you're at 42 in our example. What you can do is every year you can buy less than 5% shares per annum. So every year you buy 4.9% every year. So from 42, you buy 4.9. You don't have to make any mandatory open offer. Next year, you buy another 4.9. Just in 2 years, your shareholding will exceed 50%, because if you add 4.9 and 4.9 to 42, that makes your shareholding 51.8. So you have successfully acquired this company and made it your subsidiary. But it will take you 2 years to do this. Some people can't wait for 2 years. They might not have the time. That is why they have been given this third option, which is the voluntary open offer. If you already hold 25%, that means you come under this category, and you have not bought any shares of the company in the last 1 year, you don't plan to buy any further shares during the offer period, you can't, and you can't buy any further shares in the next 6 months. You have not committed those 5 defaults. Those 5 defaults include your willful defaulter and fugitive, economic offender, and no pending litigation. And your willful defaulter and fugitive economic offender would be both the company as well as the directors and promoters of the company, the acquirer company. So that makes it our 5 points. Those 5 points apply here also. So since you're already at 42%, you say, let me directly buy the 75% and make this a significant subsidiary of mine. So 75 minus 42 will be 33%. Can you make an open offer for 33% directly? Yes. That type of an open offer is called as voluntary open offer, where minimum you have to make an offer for 10% and maximum you can make an offer of up to 75% shareholding. Till you reach there, you can make this offer. As long as you have not done the 5 defaults, you have not acquired any shares in the last 1 year, and you don't acquire any shares in the next 6 months, you can make this voluntary open offer. If you put a condition in this voluntary open offer, then it becomes a conditional open offer. So let's say you end up buying the 33%, you make an open offer for that. This type of open offer, if you put a condition saying, I'm ready to buy another 33%, but I need to have at least 10% voting right increase. I need at least 10% voting rights to be given in my favor, because I am at 42 and I want to at least reach 52. If I don't reach 52, let's say only 8% of the people out of the 33 felt excited by this offer and they sold their shares to the acquirer. So in such cases, your shareholding is now stuck at 50. If you put this condition saying you will not entertain any shares if minimum 10% shares are not given to you, then you will have to refund with all the shares that you have got back. And you have to take back your money. You don't have to pay them a single rupee. You can give back their shares because your condition of 10% was not achieved. Such a voluntary open offer which has additional conditions, or a mandatory open offer beyond 26%, which has been attached with these conditions, that type of open offer is called as a conditional open offer. And if you end up buying beyond 75%, if you want to increase your shareholding beyond 75%, the minimum public shareholding will go below 25%. What is the point of calling yourself a listed company if all the shares are only owned by one entity called as the acquirer? So then SEBI says, if the acquirer shareholding goes beyond these limits, SEBI will give you time to reduce your shareholding back below 75. And if you don't agree, you have to further acquire so many shares so that you end up holding 90% of voting rights. SEBI will force you to buy another 15% shares, and you make your shareholding 90%, and the rest of the 10% shareholders will be given an exit opportunity, which we will study in the delisting chapter. So the rest of the people will leave your company, and you anyways have 90% shares. So you will technically buy off all their shares and make it into 100 through the process of delisting. When an open offer leads to delisting, such an open offer is called as a delisting open offer. And these are the 4 varieties of open offers under the takeover code. Any queries or questions till now? Any doubts?